Welcome, everyone. I am Erica Desper. I am a mom on a mission to bring parents, particularly parents local to the greater Philadelphia area, information and resources earlier on in their journey than my family received them. We've had a very long process of getting our son adequately diagnosed and supported in school. And I am channeling all of that energy into trying to help other families have a more concise journey. So I've invited some amazing local parent recommended educational advocates to meet with us tonight. We have a list of questions. The turnout for this was amazing, which just shows us that so many families are hungry for this information. And of course, as much as we may or may not want to be, we're in the back to school season. So it feels very timely. So without further ado, we're going to get to it. I told you briefly about me, but I did just want to add, when I was on a search for an advocate myself, which should have happened a whole lot sooner. I fought really, really hard on my own. Nothing much really happened. And if you know me, you know that I can really fight. I had slideshows, I had research, I had data. It wasn't until I got somebody else on my team that anyone started paying attention to me. And the person I originally worked with, just wasn't giving me the right feeling. I was just telling all these ladies they were leaving me feeling actually more anxious after each conversation rather than less. And so I kind of searched around, and I feel like that's what you're going to get tonight. You'll get to hear everybody's vibe and style and their background. And if you need an advocate, you'll have such an awesome pool to pick from. So let's move on. We want to mostly do questions, but I am going to let each advocate or group introduce themselves and just share one quick tip that they want parents to know heading into this school year, and then we'll get to the list of the questions. If you didn't get to list a question in advance and you want to put it in the chat, I'll keep an eye on that too. Okay, so up first, Kristen and Dana are together with the REACH group. Please tell us a little bit about REACH, and then what is your tip you want parents to know for this school year?
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Kristen Meyer, and I am a co-founder with Dana Emery of the REACH Group. We came together through my doctoral dissertation research and found that we, as former administrators, needed to advocate for parents in a different way completely. So together we formed the REACH Group, and we've been working with a lot of families across all financial needs and abilities. And I'll have Dana share a little tip and trick, but it's really about how the role of a parent is so important and that parental input.
Thank you. Dana, go for it.
Hi, I'm Dana Emery. I have a little over 15 years experience in the education field. So like Kristen said, I was part of a special education management team in a local district for about 6 years. My job was reviewing all the IEPs before they went out the door. So I've been both on the advocate side of the district, and I've also needed to advocate for my own child. So just a big history there as far as what my experience has been in the advocacy realm. The little tidbit of information that we would share with you is that you want to make sure that you remember that you are an equal part of that IEP team. You're an expert on your child, and make your voice and your concerns heard as often as necessary. You just heard Erica say that she did that as well. Sometimes it works, and sometimes you need somebody additional to help you with that. But also, an IEP is a working document. You can always request changes throughout the duration of the IEP. You can call IEP meetings at any time when you feel that they're needed. So making your voice heard is so essential. You are an expert on your child and an equal part of that team. So just remembering that, I think, is key.
And that's awesome. That's so important, because there have been times when I've been the only one on my side of the table and there was a whole slew of people on the other side, and it doesn't feel in that moment like you are an equal part of a team. So really, really good.
Just to add to that real quick, in my experience as well, like advocating for my own child, when I'm sitting there with that team across from me, I was feeling like nervous, because you're just different when it's your child. But so I understand that feeling too. Just so even as an advocate, somebody who had a ton of knowledge, I know that I can understand that feeling, and it's not a great feeling, because you do have, sometimes upward of 10 people at that table. So it's hard to feel confident sitting there making your voice heard. So I get that as well, and I can understand and empathize with those feelings.
Yep. And that would be a tip I would throw in between. Don't be the only person on your side of the table. It's very hard to listen and record and do all the things and process. So bring someone, even if it's, just anyone that you can grab, but it's not an advocate. It's just too much to do while you're sitting there. Well, thank you, Kristen and Dana. Melissa, you're up next. Tell us about My Advocacy and your tip.
Sure. So my name is Melissa Yolito. I am the owner and advocate for My Advocacy LLC. I am a former educator myself. I have 10 years of experience in the realm of education. My biggest frustration as a teacher that has kind of led me into the field of advocacy was that I felt I was mainly elementary and I felt like I had the students with me all day. I was taking the data. I knew what they needed and I would go to the table and present it to the team. And I felt like I was not a part of that decision, and the powers that be who had never laid eyes on the student were making decisions. And it was very frustrating. So that kind of led me into advocacy, and, it is kind of my role now to help you present that information and make sure that, as Kristen and Dana said, that your voice is heard at the table. So my tip is a little more specific to help you get your voice heard. It's to utilize that parental concerns section of the IEP to document your concerns. So you can send your list of concerns in advance of the meeting, or you can send them after the meeting and just request that it's copy and pasted into that section of the IEP, and the district has the responsibility to respond to your concerns. So it's just a really great way, if you're sharing concerns and they're giving you a phone call or they're talking to you in person, it's a great way to get a paper trail and to make sure and help yourself keep track of everything that's been going on and what you're concerned about to ensure that the district is addressing it.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Jocelyn, tell us about Bombas and your tip for parents this school year.
Thank you, Erica. Hi, I'm Jocelyn Trapani, and I own Bombas Special Education Advocacy. I'm a mom on a mission. I mean, I have my master's in multicultural education. I am board certified special education advocacy, but I'm a mom who has been working this process for the last decade. And sadly, if this was out there then, I don't know where it was. So I muddled through on my own, and I learned, I just learned on my own. And but what I learned, I'm sorry, but the system is broke. Everybody expects every child to fit into this cookie cutter mold, and if they don't, it causes what? Behaviors, which leads me into clearly my passion about this, and it's behaviors. And I am not just talking about the kid that flips over the desk, and yes, that was my kid. I'm talking about the kid that totally shuts down. I'm talking about the kid that has anxiety. I'm talking about the kid that blows up, and I'm talking about everything in between. If your child is not accessing their education, and I don't know about you, but I have a hard time reading without glasses. And if I went to work and I was expected to read, I'd have a hard time. So think of your child in that way. If they aren't accessing their education because there is a block, and if that block is some type of behavior, then I would highly recommend that you request not recommend, I would highly look into a FBA, a functional behavioral analysis. And if you remember one thing, remember this. When you get the antecedents to that FBA, make sure they're valid antecedents, because what I see from mine, the ones I get from my kids, even when I tell them, don't put those as the antecedents, is that they are, what is it, non-preferred task, and somebody help me on the other one. What's the other one?
Well, and can we define antecedent for anyone who's not?
So the antecedent, yeah, thank you, Erica. So the antecedent is the reason. Okay, so
Like the trigger for the behavior.
yeah, so why did the child shut down and not talk? What is the reason? And a lot of times you get non-preferred task. If there's another one and I can't think of it, that is not the reason. You know, that is not the reason. What is the reason why it's a non-preferred task?
It's like the visible tip of the iceberg, right? But we need to get.
Yeah, because it tells you, oh, the reason is because, you know, who knows? Maybe it's a sensory thing. Maybe, you know, it's a academic thing. Maybe it's a social thing. Like, you don't know, but you need to make sure it's specific. And if it's not, that's when you do request a private evaluation to be paid at public expense.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. Behavior is communication. We have to figure out why it's happening. What are they trying to communicate? All right. Awesome. So I think we know everybody who's here. All right. Welcome to anybody that just joined. All of our advocates just introduced themselves, and now we're going to get to the questions that were submitted in advance. If you have one that wasn't, feel free to put it in the chat, and I'll keep an eye on that. Kristen and Dana, I'm going to kick it back to you for this first one. Why does it seem there are more and more issues legally for kids with IEPs than in the past? Like, is this epidemic? Like, or we just am I just talking about it more? What's going on here?
No, it's in the news regularly, and I think IEPs in districts are given out a little bit more freely to some students as opposed to others. And there's also behaviors that might not be a manifestation of a disability, therefore ending up having that student end up in a precarious situation. But when it really comes down to it is 1 in 5 parents has a child with an IEP, if not more nowadays. And in Chester County, there's over 2,500 IEPs. So that covers a large span, and all of us talk to each other. And I think we're more aware. The awareness is out there, teachers are talking about it, and the chat groups and social media are really bringing more of that attention to our kiddos with IEPs and such.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Dana, did you want to add to that, or is that good?
Yeah, it's just to add on, you know, there are family Facebook pages out there where parents of children who have disabilities are joining together to kind of say, I've gotten this, and have you also received this level of support? And so parents are chatting. I also think that there's more information out there to be gotten by the parents, so they're able to more inform themselves better about what their rights are, what their child's rights are. And so with that information, they feel more armed to be able to push for the things that they want in that IEP, or that they want the district to be providing for their children. So, you know, I think all of that information arms families with more, so to help them know what they should be advocating for. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes you need somebody really kind of that knows the nitty gritty of that information to really fight with you. But I really think that has a lot to do with it. I do also, coming from my background, saw a lot of students identified as years went on. Our departments got bigger, and more and more families knew to be able to get their children evaluated. So I also just think the numbers are higher. So the more people you have, the more questions are out there, the more people are looking for support.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Okay, I'm Melissa. You're up next. This parent wants to know, how can we become better advocates for our kids? So I'm presuming, let's say maybe this person isn't quite ready to seek out an advocate yet. How, as a parent, can we be better at this?
And similar to what Kristen said earlier, you are your child's first and best advocate to begin with. Some tips for how to make your voice heard more document everything. So if a phone call happens, send an email following up, summarizing what was discussed on that phone call. Any concerns you have, put in writing, any requests, put in writing. Really just make sure there is a paper trail for everything. And I know, Erica, you love to say this, and I totally agree. Be the squeaky wheel. Don't feel like you are over advocating for your child. They are important. They deserve appropriate supports and services, and don't feel like you are being a burden to anyone by voicing your concerns and advocating for your child.
Yes. And you know, I love to say that because I was way too nice and way too polite and way too quiet and maybe even too trusting. And I know not everyone has the experience that we had. But yeah, definitely be the squeaky wheel. Unfortunately, if there are more kids being identified and, you know, all of that, like you're just going to have to kind of stand out from all of that, which might be being annoying, or it might be getting someone else on your team. Excellent. And to your point of the everything in writing, I loved this tip, but I received it kind of on the late side to keep it. Now I have a running log of every, and this day I called about this, and then I was replied that, and it goes sort of like at the top is the most recent, which when I started it, I did it backwards, the oldest stuff at the beginning. So I would say do that and do it in the reverse, because I had to go and gather a lot of things, and it's far less legwork if you just set it up like that from the beginning. So excellent. Thank you, Melissa. And Jocelyn, you are next. When should parents involve an educational advocate?
My biggest regret is not, I don't want to say, my biggest regret is not looking harder or looking more into or whatever. And here's how I feel. If you understand an IEP, if you are able to read reports that are digging your child apart, every negative thing, and you're able to put the pieces of those reports together and with no emotion. I could, it was horrible. I didn't. And you're able to do what Melissa said, document everything, draft emails, do the letters, and you're able to do all that and stay on top of it. Then then no, you don't need one. But here's where I'm very passionate. If you start now or start in the beginning, guess what? There's a probably better, and I don't mean this negatively, but there's probably a better chance that it's going to be looked at differently, because as a parent, I know it's very difficult. So for me, my biggest regret, and if I would have known more, I would have got an advocate from day one.
Me too. Me too. And again, I understand why you're trying to be cautious with your words. I was kind of like a badass, for lack of a better word, with everything I did. I made it my full-time job. And yet that wasn't enough. And we are getting now to where we needed to be, but our journey could have been so much more concise, and he really suffered along the way. So if it were up to me, which obviously it isn't, I would say, like, as soon as you express a concern, consider an advocate. As soon as your gut tells you that thing, and especially if everyone else is not reflecting the seriousness of that concern, and you're hearing things like they're too young, you know, they're just shy, or but they're so good, they're not a behavior problem, all those little sort of things that just are like, let's move you on to the next year. That would
They'll catch up.
Non-professional answer. Yeah. Does anybody else want to weigh in on this one? I feel like it's such an important one. Kristen, you unmuted. I'll go to you first, and then Melissa, I see you unmuted too.
No, I think that's absolutely accurate. You know, making sure that mom gut instinct, that's typically the tip of the iceberg. And in my research, I interviewed so many parents that said, I wish I acted sooner, because by the time they called myself or Dana, they were already so deep in the woods that they were just trying to grasp for the bare minimum. And it's a shame. It's heartbreaking. And that's what really drives us to tear apart an IEP. It's overwhelming to parents. There's so much information in it. And it is emotional because, as Jocelyn said, they pull apart your child. And you see your awesome human being at home, and you're the inner you, your anger, your emotion takes over. And I know we, as all of us moms who are advocates, we know that pain, and trying to take off an advocate hat to defend your child is really hard. So as a parent, we get it. All of us here understand, and that empathy is so important in it with having your advocate with you at all times.
Yep.
Can I, and here's something else to think about. I didn't have an advocate, and my two kids do not go to public school any longer. But I feel like if I had an advocate, it would have preserved my child, both their mental health more. Okay. I do. And listen, I have one child who flips over a desk, and I have another child who doesn't talk, selective mutism. So, and I do, and I feel
the
like
longer the journey.
Yeah. Huh?
The longer the journey where they aren't getting what they need.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
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 Yeah, exactly. Super helpful. Who was I going to next, Melissa?
Yes, I was just going to comment on the emotions piece. Something that I hear so often from parents is that they get so emotional because it's their kid, and the advocates were all talking beforehand. We're all moms. We understand what it's like to be at that table, fighting for your kid. It can get very emotional, and clients will say, I know what I want to say. And then I walk in that door and I sit down and it's all gone because emotions take over. So it's helpful, even if you aren't at the point where you want to bring in an advocate, to bring in another person to be there with that emotion piece kind of removed, to advocate for your needs. And a big question that I get during my consults is bringing in an advocate going to make things contentious? And my short answer is no. If things were contentious to begin with, yes, they are likely going to be contentious walking in, but our goal is to, professionally and collaboratively work with that team to make sure your child is receiving what they need to be successful in school. So no, to ease any concerns, bringing an advocate is not going to, stir the pot. It's not going to be a disservice to your child. It's only going to, as Jocelyn said, help them, and possibly, most likely, help them a lot sooner than going at it alone.
I have to think, at least from our experience, it makes them pay more attention to the formalities of it and how quickly they're getting back to you and how seriously they're taking, because they know somebody that knows maybe more than you is keeping an eye on things. And that was perfect, Melissa, because someone put a question in the chat, will it make things adversarial? So that was great timing. Also, I didn't know what to, even if you think you're doing a great job, and maybe you are, if you don't know what's available in terms of what to ask for, you're never going to get what you don't ask for, in my experience. It's very rare that they'll say, well, why don't we just do this for your child? So that,
and there's a way to ask for it that will likely get you there much faster.
I met with Jocelyn, and she was like, well, why hasn't he ever had an FBA, and why this and why that? And I was like, I don't even know the things that are coming out of your mouth. So how would I have ever asked for that? So that's just another reason to do it sooner rather than later. It's like, don't find out 5 years later that someone should have come to your child and observed them behaviorally, if that's what's been the concern this whole time. It's frustrating. Yeah. Was anybody else going to jump in on that one?
I just got to add this. It's just that dumb. Like, when you're asking for stuff, just act like you just know, like, this is what we're going to do because this is blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden you have private busing, and you have a modified school day, you have homebound instruction and home instruction. Right. So yeah, if you go in there very, very confident, like Kristen was saying, you know them, you know what they need, believe in you. All our job is to help you figure out everything, right? Because this isn't like I'll keep you forever, but I don't think that's really my goal. Is to empower you, educate you, and then, so you're good. So I don't.
Yeah, good, all good, good food for thought about how we can do it better ourselves, or when to involve an advocate. So let's say that a parent has a concern. We're back to you, Kristen.
Yeah, I think we're back to the reach group. Mhm.
I should have had like a little thing I moved to remind myself. How does a parent begin the evaluation and 504 process in a public school setting? What would be like the first thing to do?
So I would say the first,
Sorry.
in regard to the 504, if you have a child that has a medical diagnosis that's outside of school, it could be anxiety, it could be an autoimmune disorder, it could be juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, anything that you think is going to impact them educationally, you can automatically ask for a 504 without an evaluation technically occurring. So you could at least hopefully get that 504 done pretty quickly. 504s tend to be run by guidance counselors, not special education personnel. So the 504 is something, it's easier to get into place. If you ask for a 504 and you're denied, or if you don't have an outside medical diagnosis, what you do is you ask the district and you say, can you please, I'm formally requesting an evaluation report for my child. The language tends to be a full psychoeducational evaluation. That would include your IQ score. That would include, it depending on what you're looking for, behavior rating scales, anything that they can do in order to be able to identify how this disability is impacting your child's ability to learn. After that process, if you ask verbally, I would follow it up with an email. Really the best thing to do is to email that, make folders for yourself to make sure, and I think you'll hear this over and over from all advocates, make sure that you have a folder, you have some kind of Google Drive, something that's organizing all of your information, so that you know when you send it, what you sent. The district has, I don't know the exact timeline, but maybe like 30 days to respond to you. They have to respond to you in writing, and they need to respond to you with a permission, a notice of recommended educational placement if they are not going to test. And they need to tell you why they're not going to test. If they are going to test, they're going to issue a permission to evaluate. On that permission to evaluate is going to be the list of things they're going to do, what types of tests they're going to do, what kinds of behavior scales that they are going to do. So when you sign off on that permission to evaluate, it will have, do they think they need an occupational therapy evaluation? Do they need a speech and language evaluation? So definitely making sure if you contact the school district about what it is that you want, making sure that everything's in that PTE, because if it's not in there and they go through the evaluation process and they issue an IEP and you're like, but wait, we wanted speech, it's like a whole nother reevaluation process again. So just really combing through that document to make sure that everything you identified is in there.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Anybody else want to jump on that one? Go ahead.
Somebody in the chat said, what can they do? My child with autism had an IEP wanting to move to a 504, school denied request for an independent evaluation, stating that their evaluation was comprehensive and found no deficits. That it's hard to say or comment on some particulars if we don't necessarily have the case in front of us or the paperwork in front of us. So it's hard to say. Sometimes, districts can deny an independent education evaluation. And, sometimes they allow it, sometimes they deny it. So, without having all of the information, it would really be hard to say what guidance would be for that. So that would be my response to that question. Dana, if anybody else wants to jump in.
So it would be a good example of like reach out so someone can know the particulars and give a better answer for that particular situation. Yeah, Jocelyn, go ahead.
But it's my understanding, and correct me. Okay, thanks, Melissa.
I-
Autism, which is near and dear to my heart, is you get an IEP. If your child has autism, you automatically they get an IEP. It's not a 504. So no, they should not be taking a child from an IEP to a 504. And if at any time anybody wants to take your child to an IEP to a 504, they better have really, really good reasons.
Well,
Like,
that's why I'm saying it's really hard to
Right.
really say anything unless like I have that case in front of me. So it's hard to kind of, like I struggle providing
no,
that
yeah.
specific guidance just because I would need to really see the evaluation reports and really listen to the story before I could, say that in stone.
Well, and Kristen.
Yeah, no, I was just saying the autism, about the autism diagnosis, that, yeah, so.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest difference between a 504 and an IEP is that need for the specially designed instruction. So I'd be curious in this case, why is the district recommending that they are no longer in need of specially designed instruction? And it was my understanding that when a family in writing requests an IEE, the district can agree or take the family to due process and argue why their evaluation was sufficient. So that would be my biggest question, is how did they say their evaluation was comprehensive? Was this verbally? Was this written? Because it sounds like they didn't follow all of the procedures for that. So again, yes, I think we need to know all of the information. So I would definitely in this
Sometimes it's hard to give a
situation
quick
reach out.
answer.
And just to add one more level into it, if you're asking for the district to pay for an IEE, that will be denied. So if you want an IEE, at any point in time, a family can go out and pay for one. But if you're looking for reimbursement, the districts will not provide that. So there's that other little piece of it too. So if that's how the question was also being worded, that's where denial would come in. They really can't deny an IEE if it has relevant crossover testing data that supports a diagnosis. And in these cases, you really want to look at the subtests to ensure that the subtests are identifying those more intricate tendencies with children on the spectrum.
Yeah. So in the chat, mom says written refusal, they're filing due process tomorrow. So Kristen, are you saying like that's kind of just the process?
If they didn't list anything, they simply just said due process tomorrow, then they might just be saying we're not going to pay for this, and suggest that. I would suggest you get your IEE done and pay out of pocket. Call your insurance provider. They might, different providers or medical assistants. No, Jamie's saying absolutely not. Okay, rewind that part. I did have a couple people have success with that. I don't
You
know how
can
they
chime
worded it.
in,
So
No, during COVID, I researched that and I had like spreadsheets for my spreadsheets. And it came down to one particular place that didn't put me out in Pittsburgh, and it was Chestnut Hill College, which is not in Chestnut Hill College. And so they operate on a sliding scale. That's where I went.
oh, wow. Okay. So there's a lot of loopholes, but if you're going to do process, I would strongly suggest you contact anybody here and don't go into that solo.
Yeah.
Or call your parents.
Yeah.
Call your parents and have them show up as emotional support for the parking lot, and then call us later. Any one of us.
I love it. Hey, Kristen, just to add to that, it is important before you go out and spend thousands of dollars, right, on an IE, that you make sure that the school is going to accept that IE, because they do not have to. So if you go out and you spend, the $5,000 and you hand it to the school and you don't have that in writing that they're going to take it, now you have the information, but now again, you're still going to have to
by law, they have to consider it. That's the
Consider.
verbiage, right?
Consider, but they don't have to add it in the
Right.
document.
Right.
It
And
could
that
trigger a reevaluation. There's lots of avenues here.
right. And that's the thing with special education. There are so many contingencies. So when we say, as an accommodation, best, preferential seating, well, that doesn't actually exist. And it's a point that many districts will get rid of. And so to break it down into that simplest of a comparison, it's district to district, it's personality to personality, and who's willing to do what. And going back to the earlier comment about the squeaky wheel, there are a lot of pieces, and being that squeaky wheel and asking and just speaking out and pushing, really, in a polite way, but not too timid.
Right. Well, and goes back to our question, when do you consider getting an advocate? If this all feels confusing and overwhelming, even for our advocates, I would say, then just as, a mom, a person, probably it may be a little too much for you. And also just when you know that like what they're telling you doesn't make sense, isn't fair, doesn't match what you're seeing, that's a really good reason. Okay, so for the sake of time, that was great on how to get started. Put it in writing, ask for a formal evaluation. And we know there's other steps beyond that where you may need some help. Now we are Melissa, I believe. So where do I begin? I'm a parent of a newly diagnosed 5-year-old with ADHD. I've worked in special ed for years. I still feel lost on what to ask for, how to ID my kids' specific needs, or where to look for kindergarten, which starts in 2024. There's a lot of questions in that question.
Yes.
Good luck.
Where do I begin? So I would begin with looking at your child's evaluation that just qualified them for special education services. And from there, I would make sure you're in agreement with that evaluation. And that's kind of what we were just talking about, making sure it's appropriately identifying your child's strengths and needs, because strengths are also a very important piece to that evaluation process. And then when you take a look at the IEP, I would make sure, and I guess if she's in the background of special education, she knows this already, but that all needs are being addressed in the IEP, either in the form of a goal or specially designed instruction. I would also take a look at, if they would qualify for medical assistance with this new diagnosis, and see about building your team outside of school. We talk about not going to the table alone. Even if you don't have an advocate, maybe you bring your child's behavior specialist. Maybe you have a therapist or someone working directly with your child write a letter explaining what they're working on with your child and their recommendations in the educational setting. Build that team outside of school, get yourself the support as mom and the support for your child as you begin this process.
Ooh, that was good.
It's very good.
Anybody want to jump
I don't know
on?
if I answered all of the questions.
I think you did. I don't even know if I need to say, does anyone want to jump on that? That was pretty thorough.
Well, I have to support the fact that you said, which is great, if you have a therapist, like, because when I'm going to reach out and I'm going to talk to that therapist. So if you have a therapist that will come to an IEP meeting with you, I'd bring them, because they're going to be able to help. They really are. So yeah, good one, Melissa.
Yeah,
well.
very, very good. Well, Jocelyn, we can stay on you actually. So our next one is, I don't actually know the answer to this. Does the school district have a panel of experts that evaluate your child for their IEP when transitioning into kindergarten? So I presume this is a child who's already been identified, but is now entering kindergarten. And if you're
panel of
stumped,
experts, wait, a panel of no, wait, no, I can't get it, but a panel of experts that evaluate your child?
Right. So it sounds like they're going from preschool to kindergarten. They've already been identified, but I guess they're going to need an IEP written up.
No, so what they do is like a transition meeting, and what they're supposed to do is a transition meeting from, and I've seen it kind of be like kind of push aside and them use the IEP to transition them into kindergarten. And just make sure that doesn't happen. You know, if there needs to be adjustments, I would make sure that you have a meeting and the child gets whatever they need, even if that means an aid. But I don't know how to answer. I don't know how to answer the word. And what was expert?
Can I add?
I can jump in. I actually used to run transition meetings for a local Chester County district. I was the early intervention coordinator. And so what I know that we did was we worked along with the Chester County Intermediate Unit, whoever ran that early intervention program. We had meetings with families in around January timeframe, and it was a get to know you. So before pre-COVID, it was in-person meetings. During COVID, it was virtual. We had meetings where we would, and I know that the Chester County Intermediate Unit at least did this with all the districts that they worked with. A get to know you, so the district got to know a general gist of the student, and then the parents were able to kind of say and explain what their concerns were, and then come around the end of the school year, around like March or April, then we would have more meetings, and then we would determine whether or not are we adopting that IEP, and we're going to roll that over into the beginning of the school year, so that we can see, because when a child is coming from pre-K, school age services are very different. The way a child looks in pre-K, sometimes they look very different when they come in and they're in kindergarten. So having them step into the school for a few weeks to a month or so to kind of get a sense of how they're adjusting, so that then we can make tweaks and adjustments to the IEP. If the child's due for an evaluation report, sometimes the Chester County Intermediate Unit just evaluated them, and so we kind of can't redo that testing. Sometimes they're due and the Chester County Intermediate Unit says, hey, district, why don't you guys do that evaluation, because they're coming to you and it would be better. And so the district would actually send people to the preschool. They would send their evaluators, their speech and language therapists, their psychiatrists, their psychologists, school psychologists, and they would do the testing there. And then sometimes they would bring the student in for testing in the district. So lots of different ways that it can go. But yes, there are a panel of people that are reviewing that IEP prior to your child coming in. That being said, if you have questions or concerns, or you feel like you want to specifically talk to that speech and language therapist, you can absolutely reach out. I would try and do it around the, February, March, April timeframe prior to your child going into kindergarten, so that the team is aware of you, they know that you're on it, they know that you're kind of paying attention to this whole transition process. If none of that stuff's happening and you're not hearing from districts, absolutely call somebody on this call here to help you walk through that process.
Yeah, and check the chat too. Kristen's adding that they might qualify for extended school year ESY, which would give them time to attend classes over the summer between pre-K and starting kindergarten, and allow them to sort of work with that child and see how they're processing things. And that reminded me, so Chris Fick of Fick Educational Services was another one of our advocates tonight, but she had something come up, and her tip, which I skipped over, my apologies, was to meet with your IEP team within the first month of the school year, and that you're allowed to request as many IEP meetings throughout the school year as you want to. So I think that's another thing that we don't know unless someone tells us. We think we have to wait to be invited to a meeting, but you can absolutely request that. And of course, in writing, like we've said throughout the whole thing. But that's really great. I could not have answered that. Yeah, Kristen.
Erica, if I could just add to that statement, that first month is really crucial. I have more of the secondary experience. So for our older kids and parents, I typically recommend that first meeting within the first 6 weeks of a semester. Mm-hmm. And that way you can see in the first semester, in that first quarter, how your child is relating to the teachers, how your teachers are responding to the IEP, and really kind of catch things. The other piece of that is I know my teachers always did the best that they could to communicate, but I also know communication is the biggest pitfall for all of us from our teachers. And it's not that they're not amazing, but we get it that communication is hard. So take onus and reach out, introduce yourself, be that parent that says, hey, I'm Scarlett's mom. She has this IEP. Here's some information about her. Don't ever hesitate to be the one to reach out first. Teachers are more appreciative because then they have your accurate email out the gate, and it'll start that foundation for a positive relationship.
Yeah. And I would have to think giving them a snippet of, here's my kid, here's their strengths, weaknesses, because there's so many IEPs and 504s and they're so lengthy. And as amazing as the teachers might be, just the likelihood that they can read all that and retain all that and then meet all the kids.
Right. I know from my experience, I had 25 on my caseload. That's 25 IEPs that I taught, not to mention the English class I taught and the geometry class. That was another 50 IEPs that I was managing. So when I had a parent call me and say, hey, Kristen, this is what's happening, or a quick email that they had a bad day, anything is just like a help. It's that little extra that we'll be able to process in the classroom that day.
Right.
And in kids pointing out some important pieces of their IEP in the beginning of the school year, even just interests or things you did over the summer that teacher could use to build that relationship and connection with your child is also super valuable.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, Kristen, I think we're on you still, or again. My child has a medical 504 for an ADA disability. We've had a very uphill battle in compliance. Should I be pushing for an IEP? Does that have more teeth?
Yes, and I'm actually going to ask Dana to respond, only because we worked on a medical IEP together, and she just knocked it out of the park with the ask and outlining how we addressed it as a team.
I think you go forward and ask for an IEP if you find that the child needs specially designed instruction. That usually is really what differentiates a 504 from an IEP. So both an IEP and a 504 have accommodations. So those are the list of things, the SBI, the very end of an IEP that says that your child needs additional time, that your child needs to only complete necessary tests if they're hospitalized for their medical condition, or so those are the accommodations that both a 504 and an IEP have. If they need direct instruction in certain things like executive functioning or coping skills or reading or comprehension skills, that's when you then get an IEP. There has to be a goal area in order to get an IEP. Both a 504 and an IEP technically can have teeth. I think making sure that your child knows what accommodations they're supposed to have in that IEP or 504 is important, so they can then say, hey, teacher, I'm supposed to get extra time. And then also communicating back to you about specifically, like in my case, it would be like, oh, I hate so-and-so. I just can't stand her class. And I'm like, I would say to my daughter, but I need specifics. Like, what's making you not like this class? What specifically is the teacher either doing or not doing, so that she could communicate with me? So then I could then reach out to that teacher and say, here's what I'm hearing from my daughter. Here's what's happening. Here's what's not happening. Here's what needs to happen. And so, so I guess just to round that out, it would be make sure your child knows what their accommodations are. If they're too young to kind of like really be able to communicate with you, then, remaining in contact with the teacher to say, what you're hearing or the feedback that you're getting from your child, and do they know the accommodations, and maybe re-going through them with that teacher specifically to make sure that they are aware of exactly what those should be.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, Melissa, we kind of touched on this, but this goes into it a little bit more. How do you deal with declined evaluations? I think we did that part, but the second piece is, what if your kiddo is masking and therefore the school sees no problem?
So if let me just address the declined evaluation piece. If they decline the evaluation, you're going to want to request the notice of recommended educational placement, and they will have to justify why they are declining.
We called a NOREP if you hear that.
Yes.
What in the world is that?
It's a mouthful to say out. I think that's why the acronym is easier, but I wanted to at least. And then to the question of what if your child is masking and they're not seeing a problem in school, bring it to their attention. So I see this a lot with high school students who are really struggling with executive functioning skills in school, and the work is getting so piled up, and then they're coming home at the end of the day and spending hours catching themselves up. So on paper, their grades look great, but at what expense? And then, you know, if you're talking about masking behaviors or social interactions, I would be taking information. I'm assuming if they're masking all day, they're coming home and falling apart. And I would just make sure that you're communicating that to the team, and having that open dialogue.
Excellent. All right, we are up to Jocelyn. That's ironic that this is your question, because this is what we had. What are recommendations on seeking a one-to-one person to support my child at school?
Okay, so the important thing is when you are requesting things, it is not that your child has ADHD and can't sit still, so they need somebody to keep them there focused. It is what it looks like. So you always want to describe like what is going on and what it looks like. So, you know, my kiddo is, you know, getting up and he's not, you know, he's whatever, like he's outside. I don't know. Like my kid's flipping over desks. Like, and then you need to document everything. Like, I think that was Melissa, document. If you take one thing away from this whole thing, document everything. And then you have to prove a case. And this is what's kind of sad is a lot of times, unless your child displays these behaviors to justify a one-on-one, until they display them, you don't get one. But by the time you get one, the behaviors are now you need one. And you know, I wish it could be a little bit more proactive, you know, rather than reactive. But yeah, I mean, start documenting everything. And, you know, if there's any documentation from last year to prove it, like you just have to prove that there is a need.
And something that was helpful in our case, although my son's in a cyber school, so this wouldn't apply to everyone, I started documenting everything I had to do with and for him, which just in the first hour of the day ended up being like a page. And how many times I had to redirect his attention, and how many times we had to take a break for overwhelm and find a strategy to calm down, and how long it took us to rejoin. And that could, I presume, happen, you know, at homework time or when they have the after school restraint collapse that Melissa, you were talking about. So that could be a form of documentation, I think, too.
And
yeah, and make sure if you are helping your kiddo at night with homework, that is okay. You know, that's probably saving a whole lot of frustration and anxiety. So that's fine, but just document it at the top. I helped, you know, whoever with it took 20 minutes or whatever. And because again, that's documentation, you know, even follow up with an email, you know, this week I helped boom, 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 boom. Guess what? Now you just documented that they don't understand it in class. So it's just documenting.
Yeah.
And I think going back to the one-on-one, if you're talking about a one-on-one for behavior support, that student would have a positive behavior support plan. And I tend to approach that situation where we're looking at the behavior plan, we're beefing up the behavior plan, right? What does this student need to be successful and to, shape these behaviors? And what does that look like in a classroom with a teacher who's supposed to be providing instruction? And how can this behavior plan be implemented with fidelity? What does that look like? I just ask a lot of questions that leads to, oh, well, we would need a one-on-one to implement this plan and ensure that they are, meeting success.
And the biggest thing that we all hear, all of us here, are one-to-ones are hard to find. Remember, that's not your problem as the parent. And that's what you constantly have to say. Your lack of bodies is not my, and I hate to say that, but your lack of an adult is not my problem. This is in the IEP, and unless you have data to show it is not a necessity, when will they start? And it's amazing as a former leader how many times I had to pull a one-to-one from a student who had it in their IEP to give that person to the squeaky parent. And it happens all the time. So don't be afraid to constantly ask where your one-to-one is. And Jamie, you're really lucky that your one-to-one transitions with your child. That's a blessing. Whatever district you're in, you call them up and you say thank you, because that does not typically happen. I mean, I had so much turnover. It was heartbreaking. And the fact that you're in a district that has that consistency is super amazing for your child.
Kristen, while you're doing that, a later question, and I know we'll have to leave some questions for another time, but this parent's asking, how do you hold the school accountable when they should be getting that time, whether from an OT or whatever, and they haven't been available at any point during the year, or let's say like some sessions have been missed?
Document. It's hard. And what's even harder is for our kiddos who can't communicate what they've done today. So I had a lot of children that were nonverbal or had limited communication skills. And even with their talk boards, they weren't able to clearly say, yes, I had speech today. So that's where you're saying to put it in your parental concerns, put it in as a parent accommodation that you want those communications. So when OT doesn't show up, PT doesn't show up, you ask when it's going to be provided, and you also ask for the dates and times. I will tell you, you must read your IEP document hours, because a school year is so many hours. A school provider has to provide within those allotted hours. However, there is a wiggle room clause that always allows them off the hook. So if there's no sub, if they weren't able to make it up, then you need to really be tracking this, because that's where comp ed and ESY can come into play. So if you miss 5 hours over a course of a school year, you should be fighting for ESY and getting that 5-hour time made up, or you should be getting comp ed to put towards out of district supports.
And secondary to that, what if ESY was terrible?
You know what? ESY is extended school year. It is not for new teaching of skills. It's to prevent
regression.
Refresh, keep things going, and prevent regression. So if your child had a lousy ESY because of staffing, anything outside of that IEP document, I'm really sorry. There's not anything you can do. I've had a lot of kiddos that have had really bad ESY experiences, but the only way you're going to be able to hold a school APS or public accountable is data. And they'll hold the data trigger to you. You need a minimum of 6 weeks of data. So if ESY proved that they didn't make any of their goals, then let's have a conversation. But if it's, go ahead, Melissa.
And I think take a look at what they're offering at ESY, and if it's meeting your child's needs, right? They have to identify what goals they're working on at ESY. And if their programming is not sufficient, extended school year doesn't mean the district extended school year. There are other options, and it will be a bit of a fight, but you will need to prove how those options are better equipped to help your child maintain their progress on those goals.
Act dumb.
Yeah.
Act like you know. That's what I do.
But come prepared with the information and the support and the names. Unfortunately, you're going to have to do some research, and an advocate is a great, professional to bring on to help you in that process. But come prepared, because they're not going to willingly give you that information.
Mm-hmm.
But if you, like you said, like if you break down your child's needs and you break down what they are offering, and you take that to them and you give them options that meet your child's needs. I mean, yeah, I mean, everything's a fight, but I mean, just be, again, like Melissa was saying, just be very prepared, very black and white. And it's very black and white. These are your kids. It's very black and white. They have a need, they need to meet it.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so I'm going to take two more. In the interest of time, Melissa, I think we're up to you, and I'm doing this one because it's in the chat with a parent who's here with us, so I want to make sure we get it in. This is for an IEP. If a child is already receiving services for private pay, then an IEP is created, and the child gets the same service covered, and the provider says they have a contract with the IU, but the service coordinator says they don't. We might have to have this parent chime in. How can I get those services assigned to the provider they're already with instead of a new one? It is a service that the IU has to contract out. I hope that made sense. It's way up in the chat if you want to look.
Yeah, I'm gonna scroll because my brain.
Actually, here, I can put it in. I can put it in again, so it's close.
Okay.
I'll chime in if you want me to.
Yeah, you can
To
start
ask
while she goes back to the question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, it's just my son is getting OT at a place that's wonderful for him. We're doing he has an ISFP. We're doing an IEP soon. He will qualify to continue OT. This location says, oh, great. He turns 3. We contract with them. We could be his provider. But the service coordinator is like, oh, no, we don't contract with them. We'll just find somebody else. And we'd like to stay with the one we're already at.
And this is the service coordinator who told you that?
Yes.
I would ask to speak to their supervisor.
Okay.
And if that doesn't work, I've had to go above their supervisor. Whoever can, I mean, if they're saying they have a contract and they're sure that they have a contract, then you just need to talk to the right person. The other thing is that just made me think of this. If IUs are not able to staff a position, so say they qualified for OT services, they need to fill a position, they can't, you can request that they pay for private services. So that could be a workaround, but I think in this situation, I would just recommend contacting their supervisor.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right. We're gonna take one more, Jocelyn, or whoever wants to jump in. If we don't know, now we're tossing it around. Whoever has the best answer. Can a child receive related services from the school district if they go to a private school as a parent's choice, not as a settlement from the district?
I'll field that one.
Go for it.
Working with my own daughter goes to a private Catholic school, and they will identify children and identify areas of need. And if there is a need, they'll have the IU, at least in Chester County, they have a contract with Chester County IU. They send in a reading specialist, math specialist, OT, speech and language. So yes, if you choose to send your child, the school will help you in that process and work with you and your child.
And did you just say IEP in Catholic school, Kristen?
No, not an IEP. If there's an identified need. So
I think I was reading and listening at the same time.
So for example, if you have a kindergartner at a private school that has a contract with any IU in your area, they will provide that. it will not be designated as an IEP. It will just be designated as a student need, and the district, the private school will fulfill that need through the contract of that IU.
Got it.
Wait, but Kristen, just so I understand, because, but this IU has to have the contract with the school,
The school would have the contract with the IU.
the
Most
private school.
correct. And it's
Okay.
again, it goes to private school specifics. So the
Is-
Archdiocese of Philadelphia, all of their schools are contracted with their local IUs. If you're going to a very private school outside of the Archdiocese realm, they may have in-house providers, but again, that would not fall underneath an IEP
Correct.
documentation.
Okay, but is the school you're talking about approved private schools? Because I know, unless I'm doing something wrong, and I would love to know I am, in my experience, when I end up sending my kids to private schools, like there's nothing other than like what you said, evaluations.
Correct. So an approved private school is an extension of a public school system. So for
Correct.
example, if you are Westchester East or Westchester School District, you would be a feeder school into the Vanguard School. And from there it trickles out. A private school has no affiliation with the public school systems.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a child with an IEP in kindergarten and they go to a private school, not an approved private school, but a private school, the parent is choosing to put the IEP aside and allow the school to provide the best education possible within their curriculum. And those schools may have service providers under their umbrella. So that's how a private school would go. And then or have services through the IU. But an approved private school has those services in-house that falls under your IEP.
Mm-hmm.
There are also times where districts will do a dual enrollment, in which case they will provide occupational therapy, speech and language therapy at the school. And so you're dual enrolled because you do have an IEP per se for the district, which would just be for those services. That being said, it's up to you to transport. So sometimes in the district where I worked, we would have parents pick their child up, bring them to the local elementary school, receive the speech and language, and either bring them back to school, or they would just have like one day a week where they would pick their child up early from their school, bring them to the district elementary school, get their services, and then that would be it for the day. So that's also another option, is that dual enrollment.
Got it. All right. That was like, ooh, I'm glad we did that one last. That was heavy. And here's why we need all of you lovely ladies. All right, we're good. There's so many more questions. Thank you everybody for your participation. And good, that was the answer that person needed. So that was great. We're clearly going to have to do another one of these. If we did not get to your question, don't panic, because we'll set another one up. And of course, all of our advocates, I shouldn't say are, you guys don't belong to me, but I feel you. All of these advocates do offer, initial calls just to hear your scenario, make sure it's a good fit, make sure they can help tell you what it would look like. So please take advantage of that. I did put each of their websites in the chat. You can also visit the website I created for parents, specialneedscollective.com. Right at the top, there's a chat with an advocate button. Everybody here tonight is listed on there. You can go directly to their sites, schedule calls with them. So please seek them out if you need more answers. I know we have a lot of questions about school choice, what options we have in private and public, and what districts are most inclusive. And while we can't get into that tonight, just to clarify, is that something that an advocate does? I guess, Dana, since you're on right now, maybe you can speak to that. Are you helping families looking at the needs of their kiddos and letting them know?
So I did have a family call me about like just the inclusivity of different districts. And my answer to that is, I worked in a district that had 5 elementary schools. And I will tell you, every single one of those elementary schools had a different feel. It had a different culture. It had different kinds of teachers. It had different administrators, all of which were able, all of which who had a different way of doing things. So if you're thinking about changing a district, my suggestion would be go tour the school. Ask to set up a time to say, you're thinking about moving to the area, you would love to have an opportunity to be able to tour the school. And sometimes you can get a really good sense of what the school's like and what the community is like and the feel if you go tour a building. And so, and every parent you meet is going to have a different experience with the district as well. So I would, just say, be a little bit wary of other people's opinions, because that's just what they are, is opinions. And, I hate for you to make a decision about something that was, somebody, had a different opinion, whereas that might have actually been good for your child. So when you go visit a district, you can, or call a principal, or, just kind of try and see if you can get their personnel on the phone. And usually if you have a principal or somebody in the district that's willing to give you that time, that right there tells you a lot about the culture that they have.
Right. Yeah, that's excellent. Every kiddo is so different. It's hard to give just one good school recommendation. This was awesome. I appreciate all of you, and I know that our audience will too. So I will let everybody get back to their evening. I will get this recording out into the universe so everybody can benefit from it and head into the school year armed with all of this excellent information. So thank you, Kristen and Dana. They're from the Reach Group. Melissa, my advocacy. Jocelyn from Bombas Special Education Advocacy. And everybody have a great night. Again, you can find all these advocates at specialneedscollective.com, and we'll be back with more great information very soon.
Thank you so much, Erica. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.